Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain brick mansions. This movie tells the story of an undercover cop who navigates a dangerous neighborhood that's surrounded by a containment wall with the help of an ex-con in order to bring down a crime lord and his plot to devastate the entire city. Will they be able to stop their evil plan? Let's find out in Brick Mansions. Brick Mansions started with demonstration by residents who did not accept the government's decision to build a 40 feet or 12-meter wall around an area in dystopian Detroit. Due to this closure rule, the areas within the high walls were called brick mansions. The government isolated the area to become a no-go zone to deal with the crime rate, which was so high that it overwhelmed law enforcement. The government, with the help of the police and army, is keeping a strict guard so that residents do not enter the brick mansions area, which is considered to have become a ghost town. Even schools and hospitals in this area have also been closed as a result of the government's decision. Elsewhere, the mayor is having a meeting with his business associates. He assured his business partner that if the area at Brick Mansions was to be rebuilt, it would have to be demolished, and he would take care of everything, including the people who live there. In a flat, a man named Lino is opening a suitcase of drugs that he stole from a dealer, K2. Lino tried to get rid of all the drug packets by throwing them in the bathtub. Outside, it turns out that two of Lino's friends are trying to block K2, who wants to come in looking for Lino. Both of Lino's men were shot by several of K2's men. Luckily, Lino was able to escape quickly. His shrewdness in running, jumping, and self-defense managed to keep him from being caught by K2 and his men. In an apartment, a detective named Damien Collier is looking at the photos of criminals plastered on the walls of his house. The criminals were the targets he wanted to catch. One afternoon, Damien attends a banquet with a mobster named George. During the dinner, George tells about K2's package that has been stolen, and according to George, this is his chance to sell drugs to K2. However, George is confused as to who will enter K2's place for him. Damien then offered to carry out the task because he had experience in dealing with criminals. At K2 headquarters, he reports the missing drug package to his boss, Tremaine Alexander, who is a drug lord. K2 admitted that it was difficult to find the missing drug package. Annoyed by the bad news that K2 brought, Tremaine shot one of his men to vent his frustration. He then threatens K2 to find the missing drug package and arrests Lino. While frightened, K2 explains that he can easily lure Lino to come without having to look for him by kidnapping Lino's lover, Lola. Back to Damien, who was following George into his base, while the police also continued to follow them from a van across the street. As it turned out, Damien had been on an undercover mission to catch George. Arriving inside George's headquarters, Damien immediately turned on the tracking device on his watch. The guard identified a suspicious van parked outside the building. George, who saw it, immediately knew that it was an undercover police car. Angered at knowing that his movements were being followed, George shot one of his men because he thought his men had betrayed him. Before George leaves, Damien activates the emergency alarm and takes George hostage. However, George's men instead attack Damien and a shootout ensues. George's men repeatedly shot Damien until Damien looked overwhelmed. Finally, George was able to get out of the base and straight into the car, where the rest of his men were waiting for him. Damien also exited the building and managed to cling to the trunk of the car to catch up to George. However, Damien had a very hard time holding on, because the car was moving in a zigzag and very fast. Not to mention, George kept shooting at him from inside the car. Luckily, Damien was able to make the car crash while turning in a corner. George immediately bounced out of the car and his body landed in the police station. After capturing George, Damien returns home and cleans himself up. After that, he marked the next target he had to capture, Tremaine Alexander. One afternoon, K2 drove a car to the city center with his partner, a woman named Reza. They headed to a restaurant where Lola worked. Arriving at the restaurant, Reza immediately pointed a gun at Lola. Lola tried to fend off the gun by throwing the tray she was holding. She then ran towards the kitchen, but K2 was able to catch her and beat her until she passed out. Lola was taken and held hostage at Tremaine's headquarters, in Brick Mansions. Lola seemed to have regained consciousness and was immediately brought to Tremaine. However, unexpectedly, Lino appeared by jumping from the roof and holding Tremaine hostage in front of all his men. Lino took Tremaine to the police station near the border of Brick Mansions to be arrested. Unfortunately, when they arrived at the police station, the police released Tremaine and instead arrested Lino. The cop turns out to be a corrupt cop who works with criminals. When Tremaine had left the police station, a very upset Lino managed to break the neck of the corrupt cop. Meanwhile, at the mayor's office, Damien is introduced to Major Reno and Barringer. Damien was summoned to complete an important mission. Major Reno said that last night, A truck carrying nuclear bombs and missiles had been hijacked by a gang of criminals living at brick mansions. What's worse, it turned out that the hijackers had opened the bomb trigger device, so that the time of the bomb detonation was already active when the hijackers carried it. The bomb can be deactivated if Damien can enter a certain code. Therefore, the mayor asked Damien to find the bomb. Then Damien was shown a photo of a man, who was none other than Lino. Damien is asked to work with Lino, who knows the ins and outs of the area in brick mansions. Back in prison, handcuffed, Lino was taken by prison guards into a car. Not long after, Damien followed into the prisoner's car. Damien is now disguised as a prisoner in order to get close to Lino. On the way, Damien started his action by attacking the guard and managed to take the car away. Under the flyover, Damien released Lino's handcuffs. However, Lino immediately attacked Damien because he wanted to take the car alone. A fight ensued, before they finally agreed to go together in the car. On the way, Lino told him that he had a problem with Tremaine. Unfortunately, Lino's story was stopped because the police chased them. Damien chose to take the other way to brick mansions without going through the main gate. They can also enter the brick mansions area by breaking through a multi-story building. However, as they exited the building, the van's brakes failed, causing them to crash into the car parked in front of them. As the car stopped, Lino quickly put the handcuffs on Damien's hands, then fastened them to the steering wheel. Lino suspects Damien is a police officer. Lino then left, leaving Damien alone. Not long after, a group of people came attacking Damien with guns. Damien fought against them and managed to remove the handcuffs on his hands. He got out of the car and attacked the group one by one. While on top of the empty building, Lino watched Tremaine using binoculars. Not long after, Damien appeared and immediately handcuffed Lino. Damien invites Lino to work together because their target is the same. Finally, they agreed to work together to catch Tremaine. What's more, Lino wanted to save Lola. Lino and Damien then came to Tremaine, who was in his office. Lino tells Tremaine that Damien is a cop who wants the bomb that Tremaine had stolen back. Tremaine then asked Damien to look outside through the binoculars, where a missile that had been installed outside the building was ready to be launched into the city center. Tremaine threatened he would launch the missile into the city center if the police and government were not willing to pay a ransom of $30 million. Damien immediately contacted Major Reno and delivered the ransom that Tremaine demanded. The mayor tells Damien that the amount of money can bankrupt the city. However, Damien pretended to talk over the phone that the price had been agreed and asked for Tremaine's bank account number. After the call, Damien asked Tremaine to turn off the bomb. However, Tremaine refused because he wanted to make sure that the money had to go into his account first before he deactivated the bomb. Then, Lino and Damien were ushered away by Tremaine's men into a room. Tremaine calls K2 and asks where K2 got the bomb. Tremaine was very surprised that the government was willing to pay such a large amount of money. K2 replied that he had information on the delivery of weapons, and so he immediately hijacked it. Inside the room, Lino, who had been imprisoned, pretended to be dying by shouting and making a fuss. Finally, they were ushered out of the room for treatment. On the way, they immediately attacked Tremaine's men, then fled using Tremaine's car. K2 and his men immediately chased after them. From the top of the wall, Brick Mansion's officers also opened fire on Damien and Lino. Eventually, Damien and Lino had to get out of the car after they hit a pile of old tires. They quickly ran and got into a parked school bus. It turned out that this was known by K2's men, who immediately shot the school bus with automatic rifles. After that, K2 ordered 2 of his men to check the bus, but they didn't find Damien and Lino inside. Meanwhile, at the mayor's office, Major Reno and Beringer engage in a debate to destroy the Brick Mansion's area. Major Reno explained that if the rocket was launched, the entire city would be destroyed because the missile had a blast radius of 5 kilometers after exploding. In Tremaine's office, some of his men who are in charge of controlling Tremaine's finances say that they have been duped. Some of Tremaine's bank account balances have been depleted. Annoyed at that, Tremaine activated the missile via the remote button. Luckily, Damien managed to shoot the device on the missile, so when Tremaine pressed the on button, it didn't work. After that, Damien shot Reza so she stay away from Lola. Meanwhile, Tremaine brought all of his men to close all the doors leading to the outside of the Brick Mansions, so that Damien and Lino could not escape. Damien and Lino continued to run from Tremaine's men. They had to jump over buildings. In an abandoned building, one of Tremaine's men named Yeti came to confront them. The fight ensued. However, Yeti turned out to be a very strong man. He was hit several times but managed to get back up. Until finally, Damien and Lino worked together to bind Yeti so that Yeti can't move. Lino then hit a large rock on Yeti's head, and after that, the man fell. Meanwhile, Tremaine is repairing his rocket device. However, when he was about to press the missile button, he looked doubtful and gave up. Actually, he did not want to kill millions of innocent lives. Seeing this, Reza was angry because she thought Tremaine was weak. She then shot Tremaine in the left arm. Lola, who had been watching their debate, immediately attacked Reza and managed to knock her off the top of the building. Not long after, Damien and Lino came there. Damien points a gun at Tremaine while talking about his father being killed by Tremaine. Tremaine defended himself that the incident was not a murder but a trap. However, Damien did not believe it. When he saw the code to deactivate the missile, Lino told him it was the Brick Mansion area code, not the code to defuse the missile. However, Damien still couldn't believe it. In the midst of their debate, Lino explained that the hijacking case of carrying nuclear bombs and missiles never really happened. It was all just a trick from the mayor to destroy the Brick Mansions. The mayor and his business partners planned to build a business empire in the Brick Mansions area. In the end, Damien let the bomb's launch time expire. The bomb trigger then stopped. Damien realized that he had been framed. Not long after, Damien, Lino, Tremaine, and his men stormed the mayor's building and returned the bomb trigger device. In the presence of the mayor, Damien attempted to enter the code, which was immediately prevented by the mayor. The mayor, who slipped up, said that the code was to blow up the Brick Mansions area, because a new city would be built in that area. Then, Damien asked the mayor to look in the window, where Tremaine's men had videotaped all the mayor's words. The video footage was broadcast live on various TV channels. Not long after, the mayor was arrested for his criminal conspiracy. At the end of the film, the Brick Mansions area is open to the public and continues with normal activities. When Damien visited Brick Mansions, the residents had returned to peace without any acts of violence. The film ends. The message of this film is, it takes a strong effort and cooperation to reveal a criminal conspiracy. The role of the press is sometimes very important to reveal a crime if it is difficult to prove, especially if the people who committed the crime are people who have power in the government system. Although it looks very difficult, the characters Damien, Lino, and finally Tremaine didn't give up and could stop conspiracy in the government system with the help of the press.